What's up, everybody? Got a little special conversation going on here between myself and Dave Rubin. Dave, what's up, man?
Kyle, is this what we're choosing to do on a Sunday? It's 10 a.m. on a beautiful Sunday here in Los Angeles. I'm
Yeah,
sitting with headphones in, Skyping with you.
yeah.
What are we doing with our lives?
I think we're. I know my dorkiness level is basically off the meter, and I
Yeah,
assume yours is in the same area. Like,
pretty much, sadly, yeah.
yeah, I'm supposed to take like at least one day and just relax and recharge my batteries. But I always find myself like looking for stuff for the show and going, oh, I could do that story tomorrow, and it just never ends, man.
For the record, I do want your audience to know that when we agreed to do this, I thought we were doing it at, like 5 o'clock on a Thursday, or when you were
Oh
done
yeah,
taping your show or something. You were like,
yeah.
no, Sunday morning.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's my fault. But you know how it is with my show. I have zero life during the week outside of like really buckling down, so I don't really have any choice but to use the weekends for stuff like this.
Yeah. Well, here we are, and obviously we're going to solve the Middle East on a
Oh,
Sunday.
100%. That's a
Two
given.
guys, one in Connecticut, I believe. You're in
No,
Connecticut,
New
right?
York, New York.
Oh, you're in New York now, right? So one guy in New York and one guy in LA, and clearly we're going to solve the Middle East
And
conflict.
everybo's gonna listen to us. They're just gonna
Oh,
go, oh,
totally.
those guys are right.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, so for people who don't know what led to this, Dave did a really good interview with Sam Harris. And by the way, online, man, that thing fucking blew up like immediately, number one. Number
Yeah, I
two,
mean,
if you look at the like to dislike, it's like 8 trillion likes and -8 dislikes.
what I'm most proud of actually is that it's an hour and a half interview, and for the record, Sam was willing to go as long as I wanted, but our crew guys, it was the end of the day, and we taped in Larry King's studio, and
Right.
it was our first show, and our crew guys had already worked their like union limit or something, so we
Right.
had to end it. He wanted to keep going, but what I'm really proud of is the fact that you know what it's like on YouTube, that people watch 2 minutes, they watch
Right.
30 seconds, whatever. Our numbers on this thing, something like 75% of the people watch the full hour and a half, which is totally bonkers.
Oh yeah, and it was a great conversation, and
Thanks.
obviously the overwhelming majority of the stuff I was right on board with you guys, but I did. I don't know. You know me, man. I can't help myself. I'm like a caged up pit bull. If I see anything I slightly disagree with, I'm like, let me at him. Let me at him. And
Yeah.
so on two parts, one about Israel Palestine, the other one about the Iraq War.
Yeah.
I did some follow up segments. I hope I wasn't too dickish in that. I know that like I have issues where I might come across being harsher than what I'm really trying to convey, because I try to,
Yeah.
I love you. You're great, and I love Sam. I constantly credit End of Faith is a fantastic book. Letter to a Christian Nation is fantastic. So it's
Sure.
not, none of this is from like a personal place of disrespect. I really like both you guys.
Kyle, it's very obvious to me, and I think it's obvious to most of your audience at this point, that there are a lot of bad actors in this space. There really are. And I think we mostly agree on it. I think you've hedged your bets on some of them, but I think there's some genuinely bad actors. Obviously, Reza is an embarrassment to whatever he is. He's an embarrassment to it. I don't even know what he is, and I don't think his credits actually are what he said. That whole thing, whatever. This CJ guy, who I don't even want to talk about because, as far as I know, he's a nobody and he's just awful, slandering buffoon. Just check out what he tweeted about Majid Nawaz this last couple of days. Glenn Greenwald, unfortunately, who I want to like because of the NSA stuff, has acted in incredibly bad faith. And Jank, who was my boss and a friend and someone that I looked up to in a lot of ways, they've all acted genuinely badly. And I know I don't want to belabor this part of this conversation, but I know that your argument with someone like Jank is that he's just not really understanding it. But to me, that's more offensive than saying someone at this point is a bad actor and acting dishonestly, because you're sort of saying he just doesn't get it. And I know him well. He's not stupid. And so it's very clear to me, if you saw some of the tweets that they sent after our interview, implying that all three of them, Glenn tweeted something that Reza retweeted, that Jank retweeted, all about that anyone who looks like Seinfeld, shouldn't be profiled, which he said Seinfeld specifically. Like, these are all the nonsense minutia things, but this is why people on my side of this, and I think where you mostly lay, this is why they're so enraged, because we're not talking about the issues. And the stuff that we're going to talk about now are about genuine issues, which is why I wanted to do this with you. You know what I mean? We're going to go apart from nuance and talk about some history and things. But we got one side that's flat out lying. That's just the truth at this point, and one side trying to defend itself. But for Sam and for Majid and these people, you can't debate what people are making up about you. That's the real problem here.
Yeah. So
I just wanted to get that part out, because I got to say, I've only been involved in this really since I interviewed Sam. You know, I was talking about it before, but really intimately involved now. And it's fucking exhausting. I don't curse that often, really. And that's how I feel about it. That when you see just intellectual dishonesty over and over and over again, and doubling down on it, and smearing and lying and all this shit, it's exhausting. So I have more respect now for Sam, because I thought in our interview that by the end of it, we would have clarified some of it. That was the whole point of our interview. And unfortunately, I think we did do a lot of good work on that, which is why we're getting the response we are. But unfortunately, the guys that want to just keep misrepresenting keep doing it. All right, that's my piece on.
All right, so just to get into some specifics on the individuals there. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw it, but I did a talk with CJ the other week.
I did not see it because I'm sorry, I cannot tolerate that guy even for 1 second. Even for you, you sent it to me and I said to you, if you give me 3 minutes, pick your 3 minutes. That's what I said, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'll do it for you. I would not have done it for anyone else, but you didn't know which 3 minutes to send me. I just can't. That guy has been such a bad actor in this.
Well,
and is so over the top. I just couldn't tolerate. But I'm sure you did a good job with him. I have no doubt.
Well, I mean, again, to get into specifics here, I think we got to be careful when we talk about each individual, because I do think that I have more disagreements with some over others, and I know you vehemently disagree with me on this point. But I don't think any of them are, particularly going out there twisting their evil mustache and saying, "Mwahaha, I must lie about Sam Harris now."
No, but so then we really do disagree there. I mean, I welcome you to look at the tweet that Glenn sent out after.
No, okay, so I was going to address that specifically because so he tweeted out a part of a PZ Myers article where PZ Myers said exactly what you laid out there, which is that Sam said if somebody looks like Seinfeld, they shouldn't be profiled. When the reality is, anybody who listened to that interview, that it was Sam Harris was perfectly clear. He said, no, it's literally Seinfeld. Like, we shouldn't profile celebrities because we know that they're not involved in any terrorist activities. But
he also mentioned Betty White.
Yeah. To be fair, though, Glenn did backtrack on that, and he tweeted out later, "I accept Sam Harris's claim that he's talking about Seinfeld," and Cenk did as well.
Okay, so he did do that. It was a day or two later.
Uh-huh.
His half apology or whatever, actually, it was worded in a way that wasn't like, I accept Sam's claim that that's what he said. No. How about you watch the interview and see what he said? Not I accept the claim.
Yeah.
Like, they're just playing with words.
Yeah.
And even in Cenk's, at the end, I think he wrote "my bad" or something. I don't even remember if that was a public tweet where he wrote that or if it was just to somebody. I honestly can't remember. But the point is, they've made, and Reza sent several tweets on this, and Reza tried to link that part of the profiling. He tried to link to Ahmed, the clock kid.
I mean, Reza,
this is what Sam wants. It's fucking bonkers. And that's where, and it's great. I have no problem disagreeing with you on this, but I do think there is this fucking twisting of the mustache evil kind of thing. You can't. These are people that are supposed to be journalists or in some space where truth and honesty is supposed to exist. They can't keep fucking it up. You know what I mean? Like, at some point, I think you cross the threshold where now it's intentional, and I think we're way past that point.
Okay, I think you and I have some policy disagreements with Sam. I think you have some too,
Sure,
but maybe not as many as mine. But do you think, like, I honestly don't think it's difficult for somebody to interpret what he's saying as he's singling out Muslims and being particularly. And now, again, you and I don't agree with that. I think that when he talks, he's very specific. He talks about poll numbers, and again, I think his focus might be too much on Muslims, where people get their guard up. But I don't think it's hard for somebody to interpret what he's saying as, oh, you're too harsh on them and not harsh enough on us, which is why I say I don't think they're not acting in bad faith. I think they take some policy disagreements and they mix it up with that idea that Sam is too hard on Muslims, and then at the end result you come out with people saying things like, "Oh, I think he's hard on 1.6 billion Muslims."
Okay, so I think you're sort of conflating two things there, because I do agree with you. You can have all kinds of policy differences with him, and you've laid them out in your videos.
Right.
Whether I agree with you or not is irrelevant. We can get into some of that stuff, but those are policy issues.
Right.
You know what I mean? But when someone keeps having their ideas misrepresented, well, he can't defend that.
Yeah.
So that's the inherent problem. So if you read, I've read End of Faith, you've read End of
Yeah.
Faith, obviously, there are pages and pages and pages devoted to horrible things Christians have done.
Letter to
He
a
has,
Christian Nation is all about that.
yes, he never wrote a book called Letter to the Islamic World. He
Right.
wrote Letter to a Christian Nation. It's all about the awful things about Christianity.
Right.
What we're talking about, this nuclear strike thing, it's a page in the book. It's literally one page. The other things that people are attacking him on are blog posts. Now, I get it. They exist. They're things, and those things should be debated. But you can't debate when someone's just making up shit. And I think that's the bigger issue here, not the policy stuff, which we can gladly talk about. And by the way, again, to say that he irrationally focuses on Muslims, the book, End of Faith, again, tons of stuff about the Crusades, right? We know that a lot of our friends on the left love talking about the Crusades, right? Well, he talks a lot about the Crusades, says awful things. He just wrote a blog post.
Well, not awful things, right things about Christians.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. But he just wrote, a piece about how he would be happy if they dragged Israeli settlers by their beards out of the West Bank. This is not someone who is somehow defending Jewish extremists. It's just insane. So it's not that he's singling out Muslims. It's that there's a certain subset of people that don't want people to talk about the Islamic doctrine, and they get upset when you talk about the doctrine. So that's sort of, I think, our jumping off point.
I think that last part there, though, is our biggest disagreement, because I obviously disagree with people. I did a whole segment on it with the ceasefire thing, where when people call Sam a neocon, and when they basically lump him in with people like Rush Limbaugh, that's ridiculous. But by the same token, I do think that it's an equal smear when people, whether it's Richard Dawkins or Majid Nawaz or Sam Harris or anybody else, when they come up with this new phrase regressive, or when they come up with this new phrase Islamist apologist, and I'll tell you exactly why. You might be right, Dave, that progressives don't focus as much on Islamic terrorism, or they don't focus on the doctrine aspect of that as much. But you and I both know, if you go through, for example, TYT's video history, you'll see 9,716 different segments attacking fundamentalists of all the different religions. Now, again, the way they do it, there might be a disagreement with, how Sam Harris wants them to talk about it, or how, Richard Dawkins wants them to talk about it, and how they do talk about it. But when somebody uses the phrase Islamist apologist, I mean, I think that guys like Glenn Greenwald and Cenk roll their eyes, because obviously those guys are against every single individual aspect of Islamism. They're for gay marriage, they're liberal on all the social issues. So I just think it's an equal smear when they do that, because it's kind of misstating exactly what their position is.
Yeah. All right. So first, for the regressive part of that, this is a new term that's come up lately.
Right, yeah.
I actually do like using the term, because I think, sadly, that many progressives, so-called progressives, have become regressive. They've become where they'll defend the very things that they supposedly hate. So I'm okay with that term. As far as the apologist term, I don't think I've used it specifically. I don't know of a lot of instances where it's using it. But now we're just parsing out words. So I
think it's as important as the neocon thing, though, because so I think there are plenty of legitimate disagreements across the board here. But when somebody says, "Hey, you're a regressive," or "Hey, you're an Islamist apologist," the implication is that, if an Islamist does something wrong, well, when it's them, you really aren't necessarily against it. But they are against it. They are against it.
Yeah, I think we may just sort of have to agree to disagree. I just don't, or not even disagree. I hear you. I do hear you. And it's not something that I would push back far against. I don't see that much of it being used by these guys.
No, they say regressive a lot, and they say Islamist apologists a lot. And you might make the argument, and it could be true.
Regressive. Sorry?
I said you might make the argument, and it could be true, that that's birthed out of frustration because they feel like they've been wrongly attacked all this time. So it's almost like a lash out, where it's also not really a good attack. But I don't think that excuses it either way. And in the same way that I've tried to say, stop calling Harris a neocon and, critique him intelligently, I would say the same thing to Harris and even Majid Nawaz, who's a guy who I agree with on a lot. Yeah. And, he uses the term regressive. And so let me give you another example of this. So there's, I don't know if it's Warwick College or University or something like that. they're not allowing, or up to this point, they haven't allowed somebody who's an anti-Islamist speaker to come there and do her speech. And so I'm obviously against the college.
Secular values,
right,
yeah.
I'm obviously against the college on that, and they're wrong for not letting her speak. But are they rejecting her because they are Islamist apologists, or are they rejecting her for this PC, I want to offend nobody ideology? I think it's more likely the PC, I want to offend nobody ideology, but obviously if you talk to people at the college, they're going to say, no, we don't agree with Islamists, don't be ridiculous.
Right.
You see
So
what I
in
mean?
this,
There's
so
a
in that
distinction
instance,
there.
but I'm totally with you in that instance. But that's what I would call regressives. That's what I would call regressives. When you defend these PC principles so much that you wouldn't let a secular person who left any religion speak, that's what I would call regressive. But in that specific instance, I see where you're parsing it, and I'm totally fine with that.
And also, I need like an acknowledgement would be nice that I think what this is birthed out of is a genuine and legitimate concern, in my opinion, that in the West we are way too quick to give a pass to our own extremists and way too quick to condemn the ones on the other side. So again, in this case, the progressives would be wrong to not let her speak. But my point is the concern the heart of the concern is we don't want to pile on to the other. We want to critique our own people. And when we only pile on the other, we feel like we're contributing to a us versus them mentality. You see what I'm saying? I think that's...
I do see what you're saying, and I agree with that. And that's why I would argue that I consistently have stood for liberal principles, because I want liberal principles applied everywhere, not by force. Please, I welcome you to look at all. I was with TYT for 2.5 years.
Right.
Please try to find the videos that I was for United States military action. I was against Libya. I was against Syria. Cenk was for Syria. So
he was waffly on it, but you and Jimmy Dore were big time against it.
We're completely against it.
Right.
So I think I've been consistent in my views and in my liberal principles. I don't have to twist my logic to fit every little thing. And now we can get into some of the other stuff that we're supposed to be talking about here.
Right.
And
but real quick, I just want to. I'm sorry, just real quick, I just want to throw out there before we move on.
Yeah.
So for the people that you laid out, I just want to be on the record. I have some disagreements with them, but I don't think they're lying. And when we really get into specifics, I do have people who I think are worse and more wrong. Like, I think I have more disagreements with a guy like CJ than I do with a guy like Glenn Greenwald. You know what I mean?
Look, I'm not dumb enough, or I'm not intellectually dishonest to the point where I would say that they're all exactly the same. Everyone is different. They all act differently. Reza, for sure, acts more directly dishonestly, as far as I can see, than Glenn, let's say. Cenk has been pretty bad, and I think you could argue maybe the worst in this. And I assure you that gives me no pleasure. It actually makes me feel gross to have to even say that. I take no pleasure in any of the tweets that I've sent about this or anything. I assure you, I take no pleasure in this. I tried to open up a dialogue. Go back to the beginning of what I said with Sam. I was trying to help this conversation. When I finished it, last thing, when I finished the interview, I said to my producer that it felt cathartic, and I was like, I'm done with this topic. And I think I sent that to you. I think I sent you a DM and said something similar. I was like, that was how I wanted to end this for me for now.
So much for that.
and so much for that. So anyway, here we are. I know now I'm looking forward to talking about the stuff that we really were supposed to be doing.
Okay. So to get it, I mean, floor is yours, man. Whichever one you want to disagree with. Do you agree with my I feel like you are less critical of my criticism of Harris on Iraq. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, first off, when people criticize him on Iraq, at first there seems to be some confusion. I don't know that he was ever for the Iraq war.
No, he was never for it.
I don't think he was, and I think he said that in our interview.
The argument is, though, and people have countered me with this, and I think they're largely right, is they say he kind of pulled a Chris Matthews, like he was never for it, but he was never against it, and he was like kind of waffling on it.
Sure.
So basically the idea is, yeah, I say don't attack him like he's for it, because he's not, but I'm also not going to give him credit as being one of the progressives who, were like, I see that this is a problem and we must stop it.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like a middle ground there.
I think that's a totally legit critique. I don't even think he would say, if he just heard that, I don't think he would say that's a non-legitimate critique. Right. I think the one caveat there is that if you remember Colin Powell going to the UN with, uranium rights. I mean, the government lied us into this, and the New York Times and the media was for it. So I do think when progressives scream or when anyone screams about, they were for the Iraq war, you have to remember we were genuinely lied into it. It was really before internet media
That's true.
and an ability for the truth to trickle down.
Right.
So I 100% honestly, I don't even remember really if I was for it or against it. I'm not for military action as a general rule, and I don't believe in nation state building or any of that. But I do remember watching that thing of Colin Powell, who I considered a pretty reputable guy and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they sold us on this thing. So I think it's a little dicey to base everything on that one thing because we were lied into it.
Right. But in terms of, so my specific criticism in that segment, though, was he called it delusional for people to say that U.S. intervention created ISIS. And I tried to lay out that when people say it created ISIS, it doesn't mean that the U.S. created, fundamentalist Sunni Islam. The argument is because of U.S. actions destabilizing the region, you can easily connect the dots and empirically see how if we didn't do that, chances are ISIS would not have existed in the exact form that it exists.
Yeah, and that was my follow-up question to him.
No, that's true. That is
true. You worded it a little more thoroughly there, but that's pretty much what I said to him, and I do believe that it's very obvious. ISIS would not exist, and I don't think he would argue against that. But again, I can't speak for him.
No,
but
I think he has some slight disagreements with us on that because I think he's quicker to basically blame the differences in ideology between the Sunnis and the Shia and the Kurds and the ethnic differences and all that. That tribalism, you can tell he clearly places on them, and he kind of views it as like, well, when the U.S. goes in there and we did what we did, it still wouldn't have been that bad if they didn't have those disagreements and those differences to begin with.
Right, so
sure.
Right, so okay, so since neither one of us can speak for him, yeah, he does see things more through the religious lens, right? So yeah, I can't say that he would agree with that. He did make an interesting point though about how we were sort of in bed with the devil because Saddam was doing these horrible things, right? These awful executions. We know he had used mustard gas on the Kurds, all of this terrible stuff, but he was our guy. And it's like, well, which is worse? That's certainly not a defense of ISIS, but that we kept, look, it's like Mubarak in Egypt for 30 years. He kept the Muslim Brotherhood under control. Then they got democratically elected in. We backed both of them. And then they got a coup to get out. We didn't call it a coup. Right. And now they have Mubarak again with this Sisi guy. So it's all very confusing. And but again, what we're doing right now is just sort of pretty minuscule mincing of little things.
The counter argument there for what I think Sam Harris's position is that, like, I didn't hear him mention in the conversation about Iraq. I didn't hear him bring up, and obviously if the conversation was longer, perhaps he would have brought it up. I don't know, but the idea that Iraq really is a fake country and the borders were drawn by the West, and it was drawn for oil purposes and to exploit their natural resources. So when we drew the borders or when we gave them independence, I guess you could say in 1932, I believe it was, you made it so that, in my opinion, obviously I can't prove this, it's a matter of historical debate, but if you didn't draw those fake borders and say, all right, all of you guys are under the rule of one person, I think that the sectarian differences between Sunni, Shia, and Kurd over time may have moved in the other direction because they're not forced to be neighbors and to be under the same governing authority. So if you don't draw those fake borders, then I think that the ethnic tension goes in the other direction and it gets better. But because you drew the fake borders to exploit the natural resources, it moved more hostile. But then, so why people are upset with Sam on this is that Sam seems to, I don't know if he doesn't know that or if he just disregards that, but it's almost like when people blame the West for a lot of the fucked up stuff in Iraq and in some other places in the Middle East, that's a totally true argument and a legit criticism, and he seems on some level to be a little more dismissive of that point because, it's the ideology that's the problem. Now, you and I agree that the ideology is a huge portion of it, but I think that on the spectrum, the percentages we would give to what's the root of the problem, I think it would be a little bit less just the ideology than a guy like Sam would.
Right. Okay. And that's an intellectually honest place to have an argument. And you hopefully at some point you'll get your sit down with him and you guys can really hash that out. You know what I mean? Like I think that And as far as the artificial borders, I mean this is a perfect segue to getting to the next part, the Israel-Palestine discussion. But yes, the Ottoman Empire ran the entire thing for hundreds of years, controlled the entire place. Then when they fell, the British came in, carved up everything. It's not just Iraq that was an artificially every border that's there is based on virtually nothing. Every border. I'm not just talking about the border of the West Bank to Israel to Lebanon, to see everything. You know, there's that great video clip of Biden in the 2008 debate when he was still running against Obama in the primary, talking about how we have to split Iraq along sectarian lines, pretty much what you just said. And I remember people were laughing at, like they thought he was the laughing stock because he's mentioning the Kurds should have the north here and the da-da-da.
Right.
Yet he was telling the truth. Now, ironically, if America had gone ahead and done that, then the same people would say you're still imperialists carving up, you know, da-da-da.
I don't know, because I don't think it would have like, so if we did that and it got worse, maybe. But if we did that and it got better, which I think it would have, I think people would have gone, oh, that made sense. That was like a rational kind of plan.
Possibly. Yeah. But you know what? The good thing about the U.S. is you can blame us when we do something good every now and again. You can blame us when we do something bad. But I think that's a perfect segue for where we're going with this. Because the whole Middle East, by default of everybody, and I'm talking about the United States, the United Nations, the British Empire, how the Ottomans treated it, everybody created insane borders based on very little having to do with what the people wanted or even what the geography allowed for.
Right.
And because of that, it leads us, I think, to this Israel-Palestine discussion.
Right. So you tell me, man. So you saw my criticism. You lay out for me where you think I'm wrong.
So it's not even about wrong, but I thought it would be an interesting place to talk about something, because one thing that I definitely disagree with with the progressives is that there is an endless onslaught on Israel from the progressives. Now we're going to talk about occupation. We'll talk about all of those things, but I think it bears in mind, and this is the part that I can never understand with progressives. There's one place in the Middle East that has any progressive values. I've been to Israel several times. I've been to Egypt. I've been to Jordan. There's one place in the Middle East where I've seen gay people walk hand in hand in the middle of the street, on the sidewalk, not in the middle of the street, not a good idea. Where minorities, 20% of Israel's population is Arab population. They vote. They're the Arab United List is the third largest voting bloc right now in Israel in the last election.
There's still discrimination, though. You didn't,
sure,
right?
Of course. Right. Every nation on earth has discrimination. Every nation on earth. Somehow it all seems to always be focused on Israel. But yes, there's discrimination just like everywhere else. When people always yell about the discrimination, though, you know, Israel also did take in hundreds of thousands of Ethiopians who were black because they were Jewish and they were being killed in Ethiopia. And they still are taking them in now. There's very few left. But yes, every nation has discrimination. Only an idiot would argue anything other than that. But any progressive principles, even related to taxes, income inequality, where they have major income inequality problems, but they don't have kings, they don't have royal families running everything. And again, we can also talk about how the U.S. has installed a lot of these people and all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I'm just always amazed by the incredible focus on this absurdly tiny country the size of New Jersey, which, by the way, if it didn't include the West Bank, would be about 6 miles wide. The airport would be literally just miles away from what would be pretty much an enemy state. I don't think anyone debates that. I got a map over here. I'm just going to show you something real quick. I'm even standing for this. My finger is more than covering. Oh, you can't see it. Wait, I'll move this for a sec. Right here. So this is a map of the world. My finger right now is more than covering Israel. I'm basically covering Israel and Lebanon right now. Mm-hmm. That's how small a place we're talking about. Right. And there's endless focus on it, which I think is very bizarre. So anyway, in terms of the criticism about, well, they stand for liberal values, I honestly don't think you'll find a single liberal, if you point that out and you say domestically, internally, they're much better towards gays, they're much better towards women, and you go down the list. I don't think you'll find a single liberal who disagrees with that, because what you just laid out there is an absolute fact. It's a stone cold fact. But they'll never address it. They'll never give them any credit for that. The fact that you could be on a bus in Jerusalem.
But I feel like that's implicit, though. Like we all know that because they're considered, they're one of our top allies. Well, I mean, so is Saudi Arabia, so never mind. That doesn't mean anything. But yeah. I mean, I don't know. I feel like, especially all the people that we laid out before, whether Glenn Greenwald, Cenk, Reza, all those, I think they'd say, of course, domestically they're better. But the problem becomes,
I don't think they
mind,
say that.
Either way, we could put that aside. I don't want to talk for them, and we could just leave that aside.
Sure.
But the problem is, in my opinion, when an obsession with and an agreement with liberal values then becomes an ends justify the means kind of thing, where it's like, well, I mean, the Palestinians, they have such backward ideas that, hey, we can use illiberal values to protect our liberal values, because then that's a contradiction, and then those illiberal values, in my opinion, shouldn't get a pass.
Okay, so that's where the beef of this, or the
That's
real
the heart
meat,
of the disagreement, yeah.
that's where the meat of this is, at least. Also keep in mind, you can go literally the only place in the Middle East where you can go and you can see an Orthodox Jew sitting on a bus with a religious Muslim, and literally on a bus. You can see Israeli soldiers on buses with Israeli Arab people. But okay, so there's that. So basically, my main critique of your piece on this was that there were a bunch of omissions more than anything else. I think you pretty much, because I consider you an intellectually honest person, I didn't see you blatantly lying, but I think there were some omissions that didn't quite make sense. So you talked about the 1947 partition plan.
Yeah.
So basically the partition plan, the UN came in and said that we're going to split this land, this very small piece of land. We're going to split this between the Arabs and the Jews. So you referenced that, but I think you left out the most important part. One side accepted the partition plan and one side rejected it. I assume I don't have to tell you which is which, right?
No, of course.
So that's an incredibly important point. So just remember, in 1947, while this whole land, all this land that we're talking about previously is being split up amongst everybody, the Jews said, yeah, we'll take the split. We'll take the split that you're offering. The Arabs said no. Then the British mandate for Palestine, because Britain ran the entire thing. Palestine was not a state. It was being run by England. So you can blame England for a lot of this, for sure. When the British mandate for Palestine expired, then Israel said, okay, we're a state now. And then eventually the UN recognized them. But literally, quite literally, there could have been two states if in 1947 all the Arabs, they weren't considered Palestinians at that time, really. They were just Arabs that lived there in this place, that they could have had a state right then. So I think so when you talk about the partition plan, which is great you brought it up and barely anyone knows about it, I think that's an incredibly important point to acknowledge, that one half said 70 years ago, yeah, let's do it. And the other half said no.
If you could go back in time now to 1947 and do this over and not do the partition plan as it was done there, or do some other kind of solution, would you do it or no?
I'm not sure what you mean.
So if we could just hop in our time machine, go back in time, this is post-Holocaust. Obviously, the Jews historically are immensely oppressed throughout time, everywhere.
Yeah.
But in terms of the solution being, okay, well, now we're going to set up the state of Israel. We're going to do it in this particular region.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go through the UN, yada, yada. If you could right now come up with some other kind of solution, and I'm not getting specific on what that is. We could say, hey, land elsewhere, for example, or just some other accommodation that, the majority of the Jews could have said, yeah, I like that better. Do you think now, knowing exactly how it unfolded, that you would say that's a better idea because we would have been able to avoid all the things that happened post the partition plan?
Wait, are you saying that they should have just done it somewhere else on a different piece of land altogether?
Yeah, I'm just asking you if, knowing what we know now, would you have done the partition plan differently? Would you have said, to avoid everything that came after it, would you have done it differently?
I mean, it's obviously a major hypothetical. I think they accepted the partition plan. So if the Arabs had accepted it, I think the borders would remain exactly right. If the Arabs had accepted it and said, the Jews are going to have this absurdly tight place with no natural resources, nothing. They literally took a desert and made it bloom. I think if the Arabs would have said, all right, we're going to let them have this tiny little thing, I think there would be peace right now. I really think you would have basic peace, the way you have in most of the rest of the Middle East, where there's a lot of killing, but it's a sort of peace.
So do you think that basically by definition, anybody who was on the Arab side of that was against the partition plan, that it was, in every case, it's just irrational that they're against it? Or do you think they had a legitimate concern when they said, we don't want to do this deal for a variety of reasons?
Well, listen, everybody, I can't speak for everybody. I think their leaders failed them. And I think their leaders have failed them many times. So another portion, we're jumping ahead here a little bit, but another thing that you mentioned in this was about offers. And you said something to the effect of, I don't know all the history. when talking about the offers. But there have been incredible offers. Read Bill Clinton's book. In 2000, Ehud Barak, the prime minister of Israel, offered Arafat something like 95% with mutual land swaps. They were going to do something in Jerusalem. I mean, the whole thing. And Arafat, I can't remember if he either walked away or I think he didn't show up to the meeting the next day, and that was it. It was at the end of Clinton's presidency. So that's a real offer. Now I know what some of your audience is going to say is, well, this wasn't this, and they were going to move this thing here. But by every standard, it was about 95% what they want. So if you're a people that are being oppressed and occupied and blah, 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 you might be okay with 70% also. You know what I mean? And this was 95%. And by the way, then in 2008, Ehud Olmert, the prime minister of Israel, offered Abbas, again, 95% with bigger swaps. They were going to do an international Jerusalem, which is a completely insane. I've been to Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock's built on top of the Western Wall. It's an absurd thing to split all that and all that. And again, they said no. So they have a failure of leadership. I have 100% nothing against Palestinians in any way. I have incredible sympathy for them. The whole thing is so sad at every level. But their leaders have never accepted that Israel is just going to be there. It's a fact. It is a fact on the ground.
So, again, like I said, I don't know the history of the specific deals that you're referring to, but
that's an important piece. So when we talk about this, that's an important thing to...
Assuming all of that is true,
yeah.
Why is it then that in recent history, when the Palestinians, probably acknowledging that the situation's gotten a lot worse since then, why is it that the leadership of Israel has said no when they've brought up similar deals time and time again recently?
Okay, so that's a great question, and it goes to you mentioned that. You mentioned the offer that Abbas brought to the UN through Jordan and all that. So what you have to understand here is that the day before the 1967 war, who was in charge of the West Bank? Whose was it? There wasn't a Palestinian state. Whose was it?
In the West Bank?
Yeah, it was Jordan. Jordan controlled the West Bank. And before Jordan controlled it, the British controlled it. And before the British controlled it, the Ottomans controlled it. Who controlled Gaza the day before the 1967 war? It was part of Egypt. So you really have to, so that's an important piece of history to understand, that nobody had a problem when Arabs were occupying the Palestinians. You understand? At that point, the day before, they were occupied by, I mean, look at any history book. Anyone that's watching this, pause this for a second and open up a book. The day before the 1967 war, there wasn't a Palestine. There was the West Bank.
I don't view that as an excuse for Israel as much as I view it as I'm now mad at Egypt and I'm mad at Jordan. I mean, I've covered stories how Jordan floods some of the, Egypt floods some of the remaining tunnels and are also screwing the Palestinians. I've done countless stories on that as well. So I'm not denying that Arabs in that particular region haven't been, oppressed by people other than Israel. I'm all on top of that.
No, I totally get that, and I want to address that Egypt thing also. My point here is saying that the Palestinians never had self-determination. Sadly, look, I'm defending Israel here, these are people who wanted self-determination. So I accept that every people deserve the right to self-determination. So the reason, getting to your question about this offer from a year or two ago, is that they never had self-determination. And then in 1994, Arafat and the Israelis, Yitzhak Rubin, signed the Oslo Accords. And what the Oslo Accords allowed for was Arafat to come back to the West Bank and start self-governance. So the first time that they ever had self-determination and started having a government of their own and started being able to be ruled on their own was actually because of an agreement with Israel. There was a full military occupation before that. And then the Israelis were like,
so why not go the rest of the way, though?
Okay, so to answer your question, is that in the Oslo Accords, it says that the future of this stalemate has to be a negotiated settlement. And that's what they've tried to do. Now, you can say Netanyahu's not interested in it. I can't speak for Netanyahu.
I don't think he is at all.
Sure. So that's a separate issue, and we can't mind read him. And some people could argue that Abbas doesn't want it either, and certainly that Hamas doesn't want it. I think that's pretty obvious. But so the answer to your question is that everything that they've signed, that these two entities have signed, have said this will be a negotiated settlement. So when Abbas skipped the negotiated settlement and went directly to the UN, it goes against every agreement that they've signed. Now, you could argue that that's just paperwork or whatever, but there are hundreds of economic agreements and water agreements and all of these things that are guided by the principles of the Oslo Accords. So if he's just going to say, all right, well, we're not going to take in good faith what we've signed, right? and we're just going to go ahead and demand a settlement, that's why Netanyahu had to reject it.
Well,
Now,
that
you could also argue that that's very short-sighted
that
and
wasn't
whatever.
his. He did. I mean, he didn't say that. If that was his reasoning, and if we really want to talk about agreements and when they're broken, well, then Netanyahu should say tomorrow we're going to go back to the 47 borders because that was the original state of Israel, and everything we've expanded to past that is illegal under international law.
Right. Okay. So we can parse every little who's done what here thing. You know what I mean? Like we can do that. But that's just the answer to your question in that case. They've signed these documents, and it's to be a negotiated settlement. So if one's now you could argue, and
Well,
I
they're
can't
very
defend,
selective then in their caring about prior agreements because, you and I both know that, like I said, under international law, everything post 47 is illegal. And
that's not. I don't think that's actually necessarily true. But neither one of us are international lawyers. But if you're allowed to take certain territories in wars of self-defense or whatever, people would argue what 67 was and all that. Whatever. We're not lawyers. But yeah. So that's just a point of. That's just yeah. I mean,
all
we're
right,
not lawyers.
so this
Yeah.
gets to the bigger point though.
Yeah.
Well, then what's if we don't get a solution, a two-state solution on the 67 borders? What is your solution? And what is the
No,
solution?
listen, I would, if everything being equal, forgetting who's right, who's wrong, whose beliefs are this or that, or religion or any of that, if tomorrow you could do exactly what Sam Harris said, drag every Israeli
That's
settler.
not going to happen, though. That's
No,
not
no, no,
realistic.
but hold on. If you well, look, they took every. There were only 8,000 Jews that lived in Gaza.
Hmm.
They took every single one of them out in 2005. There was no blockade, by the way, or occupation. 100%. Again, Google it right now. There was no blockade or anything. The
When?
blockade
When was there
in
no blockade?
2005, when they removed their citizens, when they did the disengagement in 2005, anyone could fact check me on this. There was no blockade. They moved everybody out, and
For
they
how
left
long? How long was
they
there no
left
blockade?
for about a year and a half till 2007 when Hamas won the elections, and then they killed a whole bunch, about 100 or 200 members of Fatah. They were literally throwing them off roofs after they won the election. By the way, they've never held an election again, so I love it when my friends on the left always say, well, Hamas is democratically elected. You're right. They were in 2007, killed everybody, never held elections again. But point is, they didn't leave. They didn't take all of their citizens out to hope that there would be rockets flying at them and have to have an infinite blockade. They didn't. I mean, that just literally makes no sense.
Yeah, but if you the way that comes across though is from 47 and onward when Israel just continued getting more and more territory and okay, then at the end of taking 75% of the land, they give back 5% of the land. And then the Palestinians are still angry. Isn't that justifiable when they say you're not really doing a real deal here?
Wait, but Palestinians want, as I understand it, they want the West Bank and Gaza as their state. There is literally not one Jew or Israeli living in Gaza. Hitler would love the place, right? There is not one Jew living there, right? I mean, you can shake your head, but that's the truth. There's not one.
No,
There's
I'm
no
shaking my head at the Hitler reference.
Yeah, but that's the truth. Hitler, it would be one of his favorite places, right? Not a Jew in sight. Okay. So if that's partly what they want for a state, Israel took all of their people out. They said, it's yours. Take it with no blockade in 2005. And if Hamas or the Palestinian Authority or whatever, if they had just said, all right, we're going to start building a state now. We're going to start building a state. And again, that's not easy, and you have to deal with religious factions and
would
socioeconomic.
you say that's a fair deal still at that point? That's an equitable distribution of the land, and that should be enough, and then now you create a state on it?
No. You still have to deal with the West Bank for
Right.
sure. That this is the first part. They said we're going to disengage from these people. We cannot keep our citizens here. We cannot do any of that. So they did exactly what you want them to do. They took all of their people
That's
out.
not exactly what I want them to do. You know that.
No, what do you mean? They took all of their people out. There was no blockade in 2005. They gave them Gaza as is.
They didn't go all the way back to the 67 borders, though.
No, what do you mean? They gave them Gaza? No, forget. You can't talk about. We're talking about two separate things here. We can get to the West Bank, but they tried to do this in pieces. They said we are going to remove ourselves from this. You got to remember, when people talk about a two-state solution, they're really talking about a three-state solution because it's really three separate geographic pieces. The West Bank and Gaza are not connected.
The idea is just you call two of the areas Palestine.
Right, which I don't know that there's any other place on earth where there would be anything like that. But again, as I said, I would agree with Sam. If you could drag every settler, every Israeli, every Jew out of the West Bank and Gaza, and there would be peace tomorrow, I don't even necessarily think it would be morally right, but I think it would be. I think I would do it. I think
So,
all the Israelis would do it too. But I think
okay.
you're missing a point here on Gaza.
Uh-huh.
They left with no blockade. They said, do what you're going to do, build your state. They had people donate millions of dollars to help the economy, and they left all these greenhouses, and Hamas just turned it into a terror factory. That's what they did. Do you think the Israelis left with the intention of every couple of years having to bomb the place because they're shooting rockets? Like, that's just craziness. That's just a crazy line of thinking. I
So
don't
be,
think that's what you think.
being that that's but this is my point though. Being that that's not a solution, that we can actually drag out all the settlers by their beards. How would you realistically implement a plan that would get, and are you in favor of a two-state solution? And if you are in
Yeah,
favor of a two-state solution, how exactly would you go about it?
I have no idea how you do it. What I can talk about are the facts of the situation that Israel tried to separate and it got much worse. So the idea that if they went back to the night, first off,
But then,
again,
like, so that's an argument
acknowledge
for
it.
perpetual occupation then.
No,
If,
no,
oh,
no,
we,
no,
we
no, 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 no.
withdrew, it got worse, then, I mean, the logical conclusion is, I guess we shouldn't withdraw. I guess we
No,
should.
it's not an argument for perpetual occupation. It's an argument for trying to figure this out. Look, there's a lot of good things happening. No one reports on it. I'm sure you haven't done any stories on it. I'm sure I haven't done any stories on it. But there's a lot of good things happening in the West Bank right now. They have a hugely burgeoning tech industry. Israel is pretty much the number one tech place in the entire world, outside of Silicon Valley. And that's happening now in the West Bank. There's a lot of good economic things that are happening there, and there is a lot of coexistence that's happening there. But coexistence doesn't get headlines. So that's why people don't talk about it. So I don't know what the answer is, but I understand that they tried to fully separate, and look what happened. So now you could leave the entire West Bank. The West Bank, by the way, which used to be called Judea and Samaria. It was called Judea because some Jews lived there. But I would say forget all that. Let them ransack all the Jewish holy sites, which they've done. Let them take all that. Let no Jew ever go back to Hebron and all of that stuff. If that would cause peace, if that would allow for peace, I would be for it, sure.
Okay,
But
so
I just think it's just nonsensical to think that that's the case, but I would be for it.
no, see, I think it obviously would lead to more peace if you did a two-state deal on the 67 borders, and I'm in favor of building a gigantic wall as well, for a variety of reasons. I mean, we've seen this throughout history before. When you have a situation like we have right now in Israel-Palestine, there is an increase in radicalization among the Palestinian population. If you look at the polling data on suicide bombers, for example, Palestinians believe more in suicide bombing than any other group of people in the world. And I don't think that's because, hey, it's just their values are inherently worse, or it's all because of religion. I think it's because for a long time they've been getting a raw deal, and they think this is bullshit, and we want to fight back against the evil occupier. And I think
Okay,
until
so
you remove that root problem of occupation, that's going to continue, which is why I think right-wing governments in Israel are a very dangerous thing, because
Right, but
Netanyahu breeds further Hamas radicalization.
Right, but what you're missing is they tried to do this. They left Gaza.
Yeah,
You
but
know what? You mentioned Egypt before. Right now, right
uh-huh.
this very second, on September 20, whatever today is, 2015. Gaza is between Israel and Egypt and has a border with the water. So there's water. There's an entrance at Israel. There's an entrance at Sinai, which is part of Egypt. The border at Sinai, nothing comes through Egypt. You mentioned, you've done the story. They blew apart 10 miles worth of homes on their side of the
Yeah,
border.
and I'm against
They're
that.
now, yeah, no,
Yeah,
they're pouring salt water into all the tunnels.
right,
So they are doing a crushing occupation,
right.
or whatever you want to call it, a crushing border sealing of Gaza. On the Israel side, every day, thousands and thousands of tons of goods and food and medicine and all that gets through. Now, again, I'm not saying it's perfect. It is
Well,
far
no,
from.
they've had to the Palestinians have had to smuggle in a lot of stuff. And
No,
granted, I know
no,
the counter argument is, well, there's some weapons there too. Of course, there are weapons there too,
no,
medicine, food, etc. Through
stuff.
those tunnels that
Of
they're
course,
flooding.
stuff does get smuggled in, but my point is only one people. If there was an honest argument here of what's going on in Gaza, people would be focusing much more on their brothers in Egypt who allow nothing to go through, blow up houses, kill people, nobody cares,
Well, yeah, but in
right?
terms of occupation, it's not Egypt doing the occupation.
What
It's
do you mean? We got a piece of land that's between two entities and some water. One, Israel controls their border, Egypt controls their border. So who's occupying more?
Right,
I know
but
the narrative says that Israel's
no,
occupying
no, it's
more.
not just the narrative. It's that all the land that I'm sorry, Israel is on post 1947. I know you disagree with this, but is technically illegal under international law because the original partition plan said the 47 borders and that's it.
Right,
And
but
then so
there's no Israeli presence in Gaza. They have their border.
well
There's not.
they do still control the border.
Yeah, but that's their border. That's their border, just like Egypt has their border. So I'm not sure what you're saying.
But
Right,
isn't it the case that they constantly reject all the? I mean, if you read the news, it comes across that that border is controlled and locked down in essence.
no, yeah, the Egypt border, the Rafah border is the Egypt border. Literally nothing gets through it. They don't let people out. They don't
Oh,
let
so
people
you're
in.
saying because they let more stuff in, you're saying
Well,
that
I'm
the
saying
narrative should be focused on
well,
Egypt.
it's an equal. Yeah, it's an. If you want to call it an occupation of Gaza, there's never been an occupation like this in the history of the world where somebody's occupying somebody with not one of their citizens in there. Again, that doesn't mean that it's not a mess and it should be made better and all of that.
Well, again,
But you should be angrier as someone that cares about these people. You should be angrier at Egypt over an occupation because they're letting literally nothing through. By the way, do you know that a five-star hotel opened in Gaza about 2 weeks ago? People should feel free to Google that. Like when they talk about this, like I know they have to frame it that it's just awful there, and there are horrific things happening because Hamas is holding their own people hostage. Think about it this way.
We're having two separate conversations here. One
Yeah.
is Gaza, another one is the West Bank, and I keep bringing up the 47 borders, and we're talking over each other's heads. But go
Yes.
ahead, finish your thought, and then I got one more thing I want to bring
Right.
up.
So my point is that these are two separate entities that Israel tried to leave. They tried to leave and give them the right to self-determination. Do you think that when Israel left in 2005, 10 years ago, that their hope was that they would have to keep that border closed and that they'd have to be doing these wars every 3 years because of the rockets? Of course not. The hope was they'd start building a state. And imagine if instead of, now again, there's a litany of problems there. But imagine if instead of having in their charter kill all the Jews and all that, if Hamas said, we're going to start building a state here. We're going to start building a state, maybe using some democratic principles, maybe not, but we're going to build some sort of nation state here. Do you think Israel would be bombing them every couple of years? It just doesn't stand even the most like simplistic base reasoning. They had a chance to build a state. They left 100%, and they got Hamas, which is holding their own people hostage.
So, I mean, I could go and we could bring up the UN report that said Gaza is going to be, or it looks like it can be uninhabitable by the year 2020. And I want to ask you who is largely at fault for that, would you say?
Well, I think in general, when it comes to this part of the world, the UN is a total sham altogether. So I've read a couple articles on that report. If Egypt opened their border tomorrow, a lot of good things could happen. They could start letting people go in and out. They could increase economic activity in Sinai, et cetera, et cetera. You know, before the disengagement, Palestinians from Gaza used to work in Israel. Now they can't let them in. You know what I mean? So there's a huge set of problems. So what your question was?
So you blame Egypt for that? The 2020 uninhabitable by 2020?
As a general rule, I don't think a lot of the things that the UN puts out are true, but I hope that there's a situation that will allow that in 2020 that's not the case. I think if Hamas would simply say, we're not going to shoot rockets anymore, we're not going to teach our children to want to kill all the Jews and put on Sesame Street where they're literally hanging Jews and all this other stuff. And they said, we're going to build a state. I for one, let's say right now, by the way, there hasn't been an Israeli missile attack in Gaza since Hamas stopped firing last summer. Do you think that if today, out of nowhere, Israel just started bombing Gaza, that I would be for that? 100% no. And I would be screaming it at the top of my lungs, and I would do a show about it, and I'd be tweeting about it and all that. When the right of every nation on earth is supposed to defend their citizens. And if rockets were being lobbed into Detroit from Canada, we would bomb the fuck out of Canada. And now we can argue about bombing techniques, and civilian deaths. I mean, how many videos have you or anyone on the left done about the civilians that have been killed in Yemen by Saudi Arabia? It's
many,
thousands.
actually.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. But it's thousands and thousands, far more than were killed in Gaza last summer, but it doesn't get the play. My point is I
think it's getting a decent amount of play.
Well, not anything close to what goes on when there's a Israel-Gaza flare.
I mean, people are covering it pretty, heavily, but
All right. Well,
I mean, but I mean,
side
Dave,
on that.
don't you think that's a kind of a sidestep argument, though, of like, well, Saudi Arabia is being really fucked up, so let's not focus on Israel? It's like, no, let's focus on
No,
both of
that's
them.
not what
They're
I'm
both
saying.
being
I'm
fucked
saying
up.
no. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's all these other issues all over the world. You know, Turkey's been in a 40-year occupation of Cyprus, right? They moved 500,000 of their people into a sovereign state, Cyprus, which was a sovereign United Nations state. Imagine if native Cypriots started shooting rockets into Istanbul. I'm pretty sure that Turkey would decimate the entire island, perhaps cause a genocide. You know,
So I get when talking to you though, I get the sense that you do agree with Harris when Harris, he made the comment on your show that my bias in favor of Israel is a bias against suicide bombing, a bias against, and he just goes down a list of things. And when you say that, it leaves the taste in people's mouths, and in this case it was Harris that said it, not you, but it leaves the taste in people's mouth of, oh no, so it's not just, hey, he's anti-Hamas and specifically against the Islamist aspect of Hamas. It's that, no, he actually is against the Palestinians insofar as he thinks within this fight, one side is right, one side is wrong. The side that's right is Israel. The side that's wrong is the Palestinian territories. And therefore, to defend the liberal values, well, sometimes we might have to do illiberal things.
No, because not everything is equal all the time. I do think that these look. I know everyone on the left wants everything to be equal all the time, and this is the. I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about you specifically, but this is where progressives really lose me. That they want everything to be equal all the time. So take the big three religions. So Judaism, Islam, Christianity. They want them to say they're all equally bad. They're all equally whatever. But the fact of the matter is that the people look. I'm an atheist. I don't even believe in any of this. I'm not religious in any way whatsoever. As Sam said, in Sam's. By the way, he's only really written one thing about Israel ever. It was that one blog post, right? But as he said, if he's not for there being a Jewish state, he thinks it's a ridiculous concept, a state based on a religion. He said that this one group of people that have been, as you alluded to earlier, that have been hounded across history and suffered genocide. I have people on both sides of my family, my mom's side and my dad's side, who died in the Holocaust, many people. I don't take any pleasure in saying that, nor am I trying to guilt anybody, but my people, the people that come, my ancestors, have been hounded and hunted across the world. So Sam's argument is that if one people were to have the most absurdly tiny little place on earth to defend themselves because they've seen what happens to them, and you could argue all kinds of reasons, and are they too insular as a community, and which he's talked about, and maybe that's led to some anti-Semitism and all that stuff. But if there's one group of people that deserve a state based on those principles, it's them. I don't even remember if that had anything to do with the question you asked, but I think it's an interesting point.
Well,
anyway, we can't resolve any of this stuff.
But you were alluding to, so
Yeah.
you were saying how you don't like not everything is equal, and then you went through the things you do. But my takeaway from that is whenever there's not, insofar as it's not equal, let's say.
Yeah.
Do you understand that the anger on the Palestinian side is not birthed out of some sort of deeply held irrational religious belief or something of that nature, or poor values, that it's birthed out of real world terrestrial grievances that are legitimate?
No, it's born out of both, because are there
No,
not...
I agree with both, but in terms of the percentages, specifically in the Palestinian territories, I think probably most of it is based on terrestrial grievances and geopolitical issues and things of that nature. Would you disagree with that?
Well, I would need to see some polls or something to actually say that. But for a fact, as Sam said in my interview, there are things in the Quran that talk about killing Jews and hunt the Jew and and all of that stuff. So again,
is that where the bulk of the anger comes from?
I don't know. I mean, there's no way that either one of us know what it is. But if you want to say, I'll say it's 50. We can make up a number. But my point is that, yes, I don't think they're more radical. I think humans are humans, and then they get fucked up by religion, they get fucked up by geopolitics and all that. But this goes back to what I said way at the beginning of this thing. It's their leaders that have failed them. So when people give Hamas a pass, when they've been given offers, you say, okay, they didn't take the 47 offer, they didn't take the 2000 offer, they didn't take the 2008 offer. It's not the people that's the problem. They haven't had the proper leaders to say, okay, we will make peace. We will make peace. It is not easy, and all of them fear that they'll be killed, like Anwar Sadat.
Dave, it's not, I mean, I don't think it's as simple as you're laying it out there, because here, I put this down before the show because I thought it might be important and it might be useful here. But there's for example, Bloomberg headline from 2014, quote, Hamas would abide by PLO recognition of Israel, legislator says. And then it goes on to say, Hamas will keep trying to join the PLO even though it would be required to honor the PLO's recognition of Israel, a lawmaker representing the militant Islamist group said. Hold on, just 1 second.
Yeah,
let me just lay these out. My bad. Times of Israel, 2014. Hamas would accept peace with Israel, West Bank leader says. NPR 2011. Hamas foreign minister. We accept two-state solution with 67 borders. So I feel like there's a constant moving of the goalposts here where, like, so you might be right that originally there was the problem where, you know, good deals were not accepted. Mm-hmm. But now we're at a point where it appears to me that whenever there's a good deal proposed, usually through Jordan at the UN by the Palestinians, there's just this outright dismissal from a guy like Netanyahu. And as a result of that, I think we have the data to show that this has led to all of the negative consequences that you and I both hate. So, for example, there was a poll before the last Gaza war where it was something like 45% of Palestinians had a favorable view of Hamas. After the Gaza war, that shot up to 61%. So if the idea is let's cut militancy, let's get long-term peace, I think the only way to get long-term peace is, even if Hamas didn't accept it, which I think they would, do the 67 deal, take leadership if you're Israel and if you're the UN. The US should lift their veto on this as well, and build that big old wall, share Jerusalem, and call it a day. And I think over time, you know, we'd have a drop in militancy, and also over time, I think you'd have you just wouldn't have as much animosity towards the other. Yeah.
So in the philosophical realm, that a lot of Sam's critics say he operates too much in the philosophical realm. So you just operated in the philosophical realm.
The polling data I gave you was real. So right after the Gaza war, Hamas got more popular. So the more militant Israel is in response, the worse the problem gets.
Yeah. Again, I'm not defending certain military actions or any of that stuff. I'm just saying the facts are that every time they make an offer, every time they try to disengage, it just gets worse. So
yeah, and I don't think that's a point where we're gonna have to agree to disagree, because
that's fine. You know, and then I think the other thing is that even if you did all that, let's say you do all of that, right? Mm-hmm. You build this giant wall. First off, rockets get shot over walls, and then they'd have to respond.
Iron Dome works.
No, it does work. It does work. But, you know, for anybody to have a rocket shot over their house and then a rocket blow up that rocket, it's still a certain state of terror that people have.
But that works both ways, though, Dave. Like, I don't think every attack Israel has ever done has been defensive. I don't believe that for a second. Do you? Okay,
that it's been defensive? Well, since the rocket stopped, I don't think there's been any attacks. I mean, they're not looking, you know what I mean? Like,
I don't know if there's been any outright military attacks in terms of like bombings or things of that nature, but there's been some troubling things coming out recently. Like, for example, the other day, the IDF shot an 18-year-old girl because she wouldn't lift up her religious veil.
I think if we're talking about the same one, I think she tried to stab someone with a knife, if we're talking about the same one. But again, we're not, every little thing can be parsed every little way. We can look at every country on earth with a microscope and see how they deal, as we can do with the United States, which we both do often. You know what I mean? Like, we can do that forever. I think we've sort of gotten to where we can get. It's a huge mess, blended with geopolitics and religion. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't think that there really is an answer. And also, the one other caveat that we haven't discussed in all of this, and you could blame the United States for all of this if you want, is that the Middle East is in a full-on meltdown right now. Meltdown. Syria is not a country by any standards anymore. Iraq is barely a country. Lebanon is teetering. Even Jordan, who we prop up. And if you want to talk about real apartheid, you know that in all the Arab countries around there, they don't let Palestinians be citizens, except Jordan allowed a certain amount to be citizens. So they've kept them as stateless for their perpetuity. The UN also only grants children of refugees refugee status for Palestinians. No other people on earth get that. So the amount of refugees always goes up for Palestinians. It's not anywhere. The Syrians that are being resettled in Germany or wherever they're being settled now in the United States, their children aren't going to be considered refugees. But the UN has a special agency that deals with Palestinians differently. That's just a fact. You can check it out yourself. But the point is that the Middle East is in such a meltdown right now that making any kind of deal would almost seem bonkers. I wish it could be done. I hope it could.
So just because there's a lot of fighting and turmoil in the rest of the Middle East, that means, we shouldn't, in my view, do the right thing and give the Palestinians a state?
No, I don't think it's not about should or shouldn't, but you have to also take the geopolitical realities of what's going on. Israel has a border with Syria. You know what I mean? Like, for all you know, you grant the Palestinians to get a state in the West Bank, and then literally tomorrow ISIS takes over and
No,
they're at
but
your,
Hamas has been fighting ISIS. That's been widely reported.
but that's in Gaza, not in the West Bank, and Fatah's hold on
Oh,
the West
okay.
Bank is much more tenuous than Gaza. But
And
anyway,
also,
again, these are all the minutia things, and I don't think we're really arguing here about sort of really broad things. I think it's a profoundly complex and fucked up situation.
yeah, I don't know. I just see when you kept making that point about, progressives want to make it equal, it's not equal. I think, unfortunately, that kind of mindset leads some people to view the Israel-Palestine situation as just a total one side is right, one side is wrong thing, and
But
I that
things aren't
leads to
always equal.
demonization, I think.
Possibly, but I'm pretty sure that are being demonized and have been demonized for their entire existence. So yeah, the other can be applied either way, for sure, right? Like that. I don't think that's groundbreaking anyway. But anyway, my point that things are different or things that are not always equal is that, for example, when some people will talk about Muslim terror, then
Hmm.
then there's the subset of people that will always say, well, look at the Crusades, right? And then you
Right,
can argue, well, are those things equal and should we?
right.
Except
That
but Jews never killed anybody. We're always on the exterminating side until the state of Israel was created, and then have had to fight wars of existence. If they had lost any of these wars, when
no,
you mentioned the thing about 1947, if they had lost the war, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, they all attacked. I'm not sure Saudi Arabia, but they all attacked Israel. If Israel had lost the war of 1947 or 1948, there would have been another genocide right then, 5 years after the other one.
but the idea that there's no, Jewish terrorism, and like any time the Jews fought, it was always in self-defense. I totally disagree with that because, for example, less than 8% of the settler terrorist attacks have resulted in even indictments.
No, no.
So,
But
like, there's
first off,
plenty of
I
Jewish
said
terror, and
no, no. I said pre the state of Israel.
uh-huh.
So I'm just saying
But
that
then you
things
said
aren't
after that it's more of a defensive thing where it's wars of existence. Well,
no.
what the
Well,
settlers are doing, it's a war of existence on the Palestinian side. They're losing more and more land, and more of them are getting attacked, and
hold on. But
only
you're talking about
8% of them are indicted.
wait, but we're talking about two different things. We're talking about a
Uh-huh.
state. Now we're talking about a state and what a state does versus what some crazy people do,
Right. And by the way,
which nobody's defending those people.
I think that's the rebuttal too. So the point when people say, "Oh, well, Muslim terrorism is more prevalent today," and statistically it is more prevalent. The response to that is not, "Well, but look at the Crusades, and the Crusades was fucked up." I think the rational response to that is, yes. First of all, point granted, in the name of Islam, there is more specifically religious terror today. But if the conversation is just about violence and you include state violence in the conversation, well, then the picture gets a fuckload more murky because then you have the United States and all of their aggressive actions post World War II. Then you have all the, like, whatever, the invasion of Iraq, for example, the
Sure,
drone campaign. Like,
sure.
once the conversation is just violence and not specifically religious violence, then the picture gets much more murky. And it is fair to say there is some level of equality around, even
Sure.
with granting the idea that, yes, specifically in the name of religion, Islam has more people doing that today.
Right. Look, at the end of the day, if let's say you just wiped Israel off the map, all the Jews are dead. You have a Palestine that runs the whole thing. I'm pretty sure ISIS is going to keep beheading Muslims in Syria. You know what I
Oh
mean?
no,
So,
yeah.
so those are things that don't have to do. There is an element that doesn't have to do with the geopolitics. But yeah, we
No,
can talk about the
of
geopolitics.
course.
But
But
also
again,
just
it's a spectrum thing. You and I
yeah,
keep coming back to that, and I think I'm on that spectrum somewhere. Uh, a guy like Sam would be on that spectrum where he's leaning more towards it's more ideology than geopolitical circumstance. I find myself more in the middle. And also, let me add, I think it depends on which area you talk about. So, like, if you talk
yes,
about the Gulf states, I think that's almost all religious ideological extremism because there's no oppression necessarily that they're dealing with. They just happen to believe a conservative interpretation of a holy book. But then I always say, when you look more towards Iran or you look more towards the Palestinian territories, I think that that has a lot more to do with the geopolitical circumstance
you know, you're,
because they've been screwed for so long. Go ahead.
yeah, you just made a really interesting point because I agree with that premise. But you know who basically bankrolls Hamas is the government of Qatar.
Hmm.
So they're bankrolling them. So you're picking Qatar out, one of these Gulf states, and they're the ones that are actually funding Hamas. So that's what I mean about how complex this is, and the religion. And by the way, just I mean, let's just try to wrap this up in
Uh-huh.
some neat little thing. But everything we've done here, I don't deny that everything you're saying you believe to be true, and I'm not saying I'm right on everything. And I think you would say the same thing, that you don't think you're right on
No, I'm
everything. And we're just
obviously correct about everything I've ever said.
naturally. But we're having an interesting discussion, and hopefully the comments won't devolve into a lot of Nazi stuff, which there's going to be plenty of Nazi stuff. But
That's all right. They'll call me a Muslim
yeah,
apologist. They'll
you're a
call
Muslim
me,
apologist.
oh, he's with Hamas. They'll say
Yeah,
all
I'm
that
a
shit.
Zionist Nazi. I know all that. But my point is, what we've done here right now is really have an interesting discussion about ideas, right? We've had
Uh-huh.
right, like the ideas of if you remove these people and could you have a two-state? These are ideas, and we did it without lying about what each other is saying, and we did it without slandering each other and all that. And that, now to wrap this all the way back to where we started, and then I'm done, is that's why this conversation about Sam and the progressives and Reza and Glenn, that's why it's been so fucked up.
Yeah.
Because again, without mincing what everybody's saying, one side's having a conversation, and you could argue if you sit down with Sam one day and tell him that he's wrong, and maybe you'll get him to agree with some of you or whatever, then you'll have a conversation about it. And the reason everyone's fucked up and angry about this is because it hasn't been a conversation, it's been a slandering and smearing. When everyone knows that Sam and Bill Maher are not neocons and all that, and I know you agree with me on that. So that's I think otherwise we could never end this thing. So that's
Yeah.
my closing
So
argument.
I'll say my closing piece here, and we'll
Yeah.
wrap it up. Yeah, I think that I think the overall conversation is a little bit more legitimate than you think it is. I think a lot of the people that you are angry at, a lot of that is rightful anger over certain points that they refuse to accept. But I think that it's not hard to interpret what Sam's saying as being the thing, which is what they keep repeating, which is that he's generalizing about Muslims. Again, I don't think he is, because I think he points to specific poll numbers, but I do think the fact that he doesn't focus nearly as much on the non-ideological aspect of it hurts his cause. And again, I'm not saying he doesn't even necessarily agree with some of the stuff you and I are saying, and he doesn't necessarily agree with a lot of the geopolitical circumstance stuff, but
But then they should
since
debate
he's
him on that, not the lies about it. And
no,
that's
and I agree, which is why my criticisms have been fundamentally different than what a lot of other people are criticizing him on.
yeah,
I like to think that mine is more specific policy based than anything else. Um, but how much longer? Final thing, how much longer is this thing gonna fucking last, man? I mean, I thought my ceasefire video, I thought I'm
I
gonna sound
know.
like such a douche here, was some of my best work. Like I
Yeah,
thought I did a great job there laying out. Okay, 5 points for you guys, shut the fuck up. 5 points for you guys, shut the fuck up. You agree
yeah,
on over 80% of things. Let's move along here. And the response was basically people saw that and they were like, "Yeah, we're gonna go in the opposite direction."
yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I felt the same way, as I said earlier, that I had wanted to put a cap on it, and that's why we structured the interview the way we did, with these 5 minute answers, so that people could just go right to the source when it started again. I think years from now I'll look back and think that that interview was one of the things that I'm most proud of, because I was part of an important conversation. Listen, if Cenk, for example, and again, it gives me no pleasure to even mention him in this, if he stopped right now, if he just stopped lying and tweeting these crazy things and all of that, I have no desire to tweet at him again over this. You know what I mean? I really don't,
Mm-hmm.
especially him. Reza, by the way, apparently announced a ceasefire on Twitter because he said his wife doesn't want him tweeting at Sam anymore. And
Yeah.
Sam was like, or he doesn't want them fighting with Sam. And Sam was like, we haven't been fighting. You've just been lying about me. But so all this, is it ever going to end? Honestly, no, it's not. And if it does, it'll be because something horrible happens. And I don't even know exactly what I mean by that.
At the end of the day, every person on every side of this argument, I wholeheartedly believe this. Assuming we're all in the same country and all that stuff, we're all voting for the same people.
That's a whole, you want to do a money in politics thing now and why our system's fucked?
Yeah, like
We'll do
there's
that in
that's the thing that's so frustrating, is that like anybody who thinks like really like Sam Harris would have voted for George W. Bush, you know, it, seriously, like that's just that's not true. I think we're all voting for the same people. I honestly think so. Like a guy like Glenn Greenwald, who's basically just a trillion% right on the NSA and civil liberties and stuff. I don't know. I don't think anybody on the new atheist side of this would be like, he's wrong about that. we must protect the nation by spying on people. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, and that's why this has been so dangerous and so disappointing. And in another way, it's been inspiring to me because I feel like I figured out what I believe in really because of this. That I know that if that's what progressives are, and I know I don't include you in that slim definition, but if that's what I see out of so many progressive people, then that's not what I am. I consider myself a liberal. And I think I'm more in line with Bill Maher. Not that I agree with him on everything, but I don't think he considers himself a progressive. And that's the camp that I would put myself in if we have to parse everything down to, you're this or that or whatever.
At the end of the day, the only thing I want you to concede would be the regressive point and the Islamist apologist point, because I think that point for point they are not that. They might not attack Islamists in the way the new atheists want them to attack Islamists by calling it Islamism and talking about, lumping it in like that. But on each individual point where they're like, okay, they're wrong on gay marriage, they're wrong on women's rights, they're wrong on this, they're wrong on that. Every single person called a regressive, 100% is on the page of all those things. So I would like the smearing to stop on both sides, even though I know that you think it's specifically one side that's smearing.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the regressive term, until these people get off some of the political correctness and stop smearing, I do think it's regressive what they're doing. The other term, Islamist apologist, is that what it was?
Yeah, Islamist apologist. Yeah.
Islamist apologist. Yeah, I don't think I've used that term specifically. I don't think they're apologizing for it. I think they're just sort of dealing with it in an inherently dishonest way. But I don't like getting too hung up on words. So.
Okay. All right, man. Well, that was a great conversation. I hope people got some stuff out of it.
Recorded this thing.
Oh, yeah. They know where you stand on everything. They know where I stand on everything. So I don't think, on the spectrum, I think Sam is probably, I think you're a little bit more liberal than Sam. I mean, whether or not that's fair, other people can determine. I think you're a little bit more liberal than Sam. I think I'm a little bit to the left of you, per se, when it comes to some geopolitical things versus ideological. I think you're somewhere in between me and Sam on the spectrum overall, but hey, it was a good discussion either way.
I'll take it. That sounds fine with me. All right, am I allowed to take my dog for a walk now?
Yes, you are. All right, brother. It was fun.
Ready to roll. All right, thanks, man.
Later.
Bye.